Thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. When you look at digital transformation, there are so many questions to ask. Do you see it as a one-time process or a shifting mindset that will continue to evolve? Are your tech stacks being built out because of your strategy, or is your tech stack now driving that strategy? Do you look at how you utilize the data more than how you collect it? Arti Sahgal is a senior digital marketing and transformational leader at the Heineken Company, a tech entrepreneur, and a subject matter expert at digital transformation and demand generation. And on this episode, we'll discuss the mindset of digital transformation, tech stacks, IoT, lead gen, and the customer journey. So let's tune in to a transformational leader with a transformational shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Arti, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. Please tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Hi, Kenneth. Thank you for having me. I started out my career actually as a tech entrepreneur out in Europe. I was in charge for go-to-market for the company. That means covering the entire sales, distribution, and marketing strategy. This was several years ago. I then moved to the US over a decade ago to expand the operations to the Americas, where the company was recently acquired. And that's actually what started my current journey in digital transformation. And I've spent the last few years evangelizing large scale digital innovation for Fortune 100 companies. At this point, I'm currently leading the digital optimization initiative within the marketing organization of the second largest beer company worldwide and supporting them in optimizing their digital spend, including e-commerce, but also brand awareness based campaigns, how to basically leverage data driven insights and technology to make the media spend more effective.
So, I have had a lot of conversations over my career about digital transformation, and I mean, dating back to all types of technologies. But what do you think it takes to make a company successful in their digital transformation efforts? I mean, kind of walk us through a roadmap of what people need to think through, because I think most people for the most part get it, but going to start to implement it is a different story for a lot of brands still to date.
Yes, I mean absolutely. It's a big undertaking, and I think the main thing which is important is to not look at it like a one-time activity and then it's
Yes,
done. It's literally an evolution, and it's a change in mindset. It's a change in way of
exactly.
working, and it exactly. It cannot just happen within marketing or within sales or within support. It's really across all the touch points with your consumers, but also internally to increase efficiency, increase basically leveraging data, and of course, automation. So that's really, I think, a very important insight to realize it's not just a one-time thing, it's a process. And as technology is evolving every day, your activities around digital transformation will evolve as well. Of course, the initial incubation is going to be a big undertaking, but still it's the job is never done because basically technology is changing every day. You can see specifically for marketing, Facebook is adding a new feature, Twitter is going on all different audiences, so it's all changing every day. So we need to figure out how are the audiences changing and the platforms changing. In terms of a roadmap, I typically look at it basically in three big, if you will, chunks or three big pillars, right? One is the people, right? You need to have the right capabilities in house or externally or a hybrid, obviously, right? It doesn't matter, but you need those capabilities. A lot of the traditional CPG companies are still very, very old school marketing focused, do not have that comfort with data, comfort with real time
Couldn't
insights.
agree more.
It's typically, right? It's typically that you basically look at maybe you'll do a pre-market study before you launch a campaign to see what creative works best, and then you'll run it, and then afterwards you'll do a post study to figure out did it work or not, right? But the ability which we have today with data driven marketing or performance marketing is that we can actually make real time optimizations, right? So we don't have to wait for months to basically see whether something worked. And I think that's a big thing, the capabilities. The second thing is obviously having proper processes in place, right? What do we actually want to do? What are the different platforms? What are the content pieces? How are we targeting our content differently depending on who we're talking to or where we're talking to them, right? Really a proper process on how this works and how these interfaces seamlessly work together. And then the third one is, of course, the technology stack, right? The marketing technology, which obviously will cover your CDPs, your DMPs, because again, another thing which I see a lot across different companies and clients I work with is you have a data strategy in place on how to collect the data, but you don't really have a strategy in place on how to use the data,
Agree.
right?
Yeah.
So that's a big transition, right?
Or
I've
they just
seen
lean
so
on an
many.
agency who may or may not know how to
Exactly.
use the data.
Exactly, which again is right now gives you restrictions with third party data, right? That there you're restricted on access to that, on how to use the data. And the same thing is if you don't know what is there, then how are you going to decide how to use it? So you need the stuff really in house and be able to understand that. Um, so that's the third thing. So I always look at it in the capabilities, obviously the processes, but then also the technology, and that's a challenge in itself, right? Because a lot of people have legacy systems. How do you transition and habits and all those aspects? But I mean, I think a big thing to make it overall, to answer your question in a nutshell on how to make it successful, is commitment from the top, right? It has
Oh,
to
couldn't
be
agree
clear,
more. Absolutely.
right? That this is a mandate. This change has to happen. This is the future, and this is it.
Yeah, and I agree with your point completely. To me, it's really sort of a mindset. You have to have a mindset. It's not a one-off. And one of the key things I think, and I'm frustrated often when I see companies that still don't have a digital transformation leader slash evangelist. And that has to be driven, like you said, from the top. You have to put somebody in place to help drive those changes. And it's good to see that you're in that role as well, because you still see a lot of brands who don't have one, and it needs a concerted effort into that kind of role. But there's so many more technologies that come out every day. I just got back from another martech conference. How should you look at evaluating the pieces of technology in order to advance those digital transformation efforts? Because the newest martech stack, what's the current graph has 8,000 pieces of technology now. I mean, it's something ridiculous. But you've got to bring in a lot of technologies, but you also have to know how to integrate those in without just becoming another useless piece of technology.
Yes, I mean, and I think the last part which you said is kind of the key thing which I see, right? Clients who are successful are typically not people who buy the technology and then figure out what to do with it, but rather they're the ones who sit there, look at what's the goal, what is the audience, what is the consumer segment, what is the messaging, what is our overall strategy, and then pick basically the technology which supports that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's really a big shift as well, because I feel like there's so much new stuff coming out there every day, as you said yourself, CDPs, DMPs, but also other omni-channel tools, automation tools, everything's out there. But the point is, again, if we have all these tools and we have all this data, but we're not actually using it to drive campaigns, right, and drive conversion, then what's the use of it, right? So I think it's obviously critical to stay on top of new technologies coming out, going to conferences and, understanding basically what's out there. But I think the most important part behind it is to first have your strategy and look for basically technologies to support your strategy, not basically have tools and build your strategy around the tools.
Yeah, and strategies to help keep that focus first on the customer as well. So, you
Yeah.
know, what do you typically look at with in regards to legacy technologies? In order to integrate those different pieces, because there are a lot of people who aren't integrators, if IT integrators, if you will, where you're trying to connect the wrong kinds of pieces of equipment together, and that happens all the time with old systems that you bought 5 years ago. And there are a lot of systems that people don't use that are just sitting there collecting dust. So, where do you sort of look at trying to integrate newer technologies with older ones that are sitting inside the organization today?
Yeah, I mean that's just a challenge which exists and kind of will be
I
there. I
was looking
think
for a
if we
magic
can.
answer, though, Artie. I mean,
Yeah.
this is
Me too. Let
Yeah,
me know when you
exactly.
find it.
No kidding.
um, so yeah, it is a challenge. I think the way we can improve is how we manage the challenge, right?
Mhm.
Because the thing is, we're everyone behind technology. You have humans as well, right? So everything is based on people. So people have their way of doing things. They're used to things. Naturally, one has a certain resistance to change, meaning thereby one likes doing things the way one has been doing it. So transitioning from old systems to new systems, even in my my prior life as a tech entrepreneur, working with ERP systems has always been a topic, right? But I do feel that there are ways that one can make it easier with effective trainings, data transfers, automations, like basically putting the burden on the actual users of the tool as low as possible, also
Mhm.
as an organization, not just as a tech provider, but really getting them ramped up. Because one of the other big challenges, specifically from a marketing side, is also content management, right?
Agreed.
All this management for creative assets, then you have the commercial marketing team doing that, and the brand team doing that, and the media team doing that, and then you
Mhm.
maybe have some global unit doing that, and all these content pieces just get lost, and in the end everyone starts doing a new photo shoot because there's no content, right? So these are things which actually really end up being very, very challenging. And I'm bringing pretty basic examples because I feel like we need to first fix the basics before we can get into all kind of fancy technology, right?
Sure.
Because I've yet to see really effective content management in terms of assets, but also in terms of contents across platforms, across different units, geos, and so on. So I really feel that it's very critical to build these links and not look at the different pieces of the puzzles in an isolated way to make this legacy transformation to new technology an efficient process, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Well, then at least when you're looking at your own tech stack, how does the Internet of Things fit into that purview, and where do you sort of see it going?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've been working on two larger projects around the Internet of Things. Obviously, can't go into details at this point because
Sure.
they're not released in the market yet. But I really feel that that's a huge opportunity for us as marketeers to basically use data input through these sensors, right? To customize our media, right? Be that consumption data, right? In terms of, how quickly are things getting consumed? Where are they getting consumed, right? Because specifically now that I'm in the alcohol beverage industry, there's a lot of restrictions, right? On
Sure.
terms of with the three-tier system, right? I don't as an alcohol provider or a brewer, you don't really know direct consumption data from the end consumer because you basically have to go from brewer to distributor, distributor to retailer, retailer to consumer, right? So basically getting all this information is firstly goes to multiple layers, then you have the concerns about is it first party data or is it not, right? How can you use it, the consent around it? But with basically IoT, with direct sensors which you can put into different objects, right? Be that in a kitchen, be that in a bar, right? Be that wherever, you can actually directly get first party data,
Hmm.
and based on that you can use that to target your media, to optimize your media, and hopefully then also get better return in ad spend as well as conversions.
So when you think about implementing all of these types of pieces and championing these advancements in technology as part of that customer journey, who are the types of stakeholders that a corporate leadership needs to look at to start putting this all together in order to push it forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because that goes back to our initial, conversation about commitment from the top,
Yeah.
right? So I think we're really in a
Yeah, but the
stage
CEO
of
can't drive everything, you know?
exactly, but that's what I mean, the top, like the full layer, not just
Sure.
the right. It's no more just a pyramid. Exactly. That's the CEO actually
Good point.
hardly will be involved in this, right? But what I'm saying, top meaning thereby your chief digital officer, your chief marketing officer, your chief sales officer, right? It has to be a collaboration, right? Because the key part is at this point, there are blurred lines between everything, right? Marketing, PR, right? Technology, everything has blurred lines. So let's say for this IoT, right? You need technology, but you also need innovation, right? But you
Hmm.
also need the sales team to position it with the distributors, right? Then you need the support team in place, right? These are all initiatives where if the leadership is not bought in and bringing their teams obviously in turn on board, you can't really mobilize the crowd for this, because through that it's not just marketing anymore, meaning thereby we just take basically our ads and we print them, right? Or we do a TV spot, but we're actually going out there and we need technology to capture that data and to optimize our stuff. We need people who understand technology, which are not necessarily always the same people who understand marketing, right? Which are not the same people who are going to be standing in front of the consumer, right?
Hmm.
So I think this cross functional commitment from the top, so not just the CEO, but I mean in our case, I have really seen companies where the best way of implementing digital strategy was to have a completely separate digital acceleration unit, right? Just a
Hmm.
completely separate dedicated team which would go throughout the organization and would just basically drive this mindset, right? With education, with materials, with resources. Now, depending on your setup, that strategy may work, but depending on how siloed your company is in general, that strategy won't really work. So you basically need to, in every department, have somebody who does it and champions this mindset, right? So you'll distribute that expertise across departments versus they having one acceleration unit. So my point is there's no one answer for every organization, but what I have seen across the board is you need the realization that digital marketing or digital transformation is a cross functional activity where all of these departments have to work together. Like, as I said, even if you do, IoT, right? There's so
Hmm.
much technology behind it, there's so much support, there's so much sales information, and then marketing all this, right? Using it is it's like five departments right there.
So let's switch a little bit and talk about commerce and lead gen. And ultimately, we've got to use a lot of these technologies to drive sales. What do you do to drive demand lead gen outside of paid search once it really plateaus? Because I think a lot of these technologies that we're going to need to leverage are a lot of people are starting to see where paid search either becomes too inefficient or it's just not driving as much traffic as it used to because people are finding disfavor with a lot of the typical paid search type ads. But what are your favorite channels other than Google to start building out for lead gen efforts?
So I think one of the things which I have been trying to champion and think is really important is basically to view the consumer journey as a funnel, right? So, which again sounds very simple, and I like to work with simple concepts, but we all know, that the disconnect between the different funnel stages is still very, very
Oh, it's
large,
huge.
specifically
Yeah.
within CPG, right? And I think that's really a big aspect on how do I focus on driving effective demand gen, meaning thereby, I'll use different platforms for at the top of the funnel, right? Where you're just about creating awareness, you're just about putting the value prop out of there, branding and so on, which would be more your Facebook or your social, basically, your programmatic display, things like that, right? But then basically, when people have already engaged with your brand, you can go down and then obviously you'll go into retargeting, right? Which is going to be, which is, I mean, I'm amazed how many companies, CPG companies, still do not
I
do
know. I
retargeting.
know. I think retargeting is
They
one of the
just do
greatest
not.
gifts ever.
Yeah, it's basically a low hanging fruit, right? It's basically I'm a consumer, I put my hand up, raised my hand and said I'm interested in your product, and you're basically ignoring me, right? I mean, right, you're coming back and you're telling me the same thing over and over, while I want to get more specific information
Mm-hmm.
because I've already said I think you're interesting, right? So I mean, there are two stages even within retargeting, right? One of the thing is like, are you retargeting the consumers? But then also, are you retargeting them with a different message than the one you're prospecting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Am I coming in and saying, hey, I'm the best beer in the world because you don't know who I am? Or am I coming to you and saying, hey, I know I'm the best beer in the world. Would you like to get it delivered within an hour? Right? That's a whole different message. And you're telling me basically, that I know, right? And that sounds very basic, but again, that's really important to us as consumers, right? We want to know that it is actually personalized. It is dependent on basically, it's really critical to adapt that messaging consistently across channels to where the consumer is actually in their customer journey with us, right? Because again, everybody's collecting data, but how do we actually activate that, right? Why are we not using data triggers like geos, like, hey, New York, winter's coming, right? Or sports, right? Going specifically for, New York Soccer Football Club, for instance, or weather, right? So obviously you get emails, saying, hey, it's cold, get your beer delivered, but that's not the point I'm talking about. I'm saying actually have creative variations which automatically get triggered, right, by these data signals. And for that, obviously you have to first collect data, but I think that's really a key part, right? Because then when you're lower down the funnel, retargeting is obviously a big thing. And that, to your question, that's where paid search comes in, because in addition, people are actually showing intent, right? If I Google order beer now, then I'm actually saying I want to order beer now, right?
Hmm.
So your basically intention, which you can capture there, is much more than if you're just browsing through Facebook and I say order beer now, right? So that's basically really a critical part. And up until that point, up until the mid funnel, you basically typically have anonymous consumers. You don't have their data. But then when they go lower down the funnel and you'll have their email address or their other data, then you can start getting personalized, right? Then you're at the lower part of the funnel and you can actually go in and do email marketing campaigns or text messaging campaigns, right? Where you're super personalized, right? And all this messaging along the funnel should theoretically be, consistent and, across channels and across funnel stages. And I think that's really one of the challenges. And the second big challenge is the KPIs, right? If I'm looking at basically email marketing, I shouldn't be looking at cost per lead, right? I should be looking at cost per acquisition because that's lower funnel.
Agreed.
If I'm in the middle funnel, I should be looking at cost per add to cart, right? So it's just these KPIs get mixed up a lot as well, right?
Hmm.
And I know we met at a panel a few months ago where I was speaking about measurement and ROI, right? It's like if I'm going to look at my CPM while I'm trying to do performance marketing and direct marketing, then I'm going to get completely skewed results because that's not my metrics,
Right.
right? It's not a frequency and reach buy. It's basically a conversion buy, a click, right? So that's really something where I feel there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. And I had a really interesting conversation with the chief digital officer of a very, very large food chain company. And she said she came in and all what she did was basically take her two versions of emails which they had, expanded it to 200 versions, right? Because they had so many different variations. It was no problem at all. And she said, for the people who always only bought white meat, she always only showed white meat in their email imagery and not red meat.
Right.
And her conversion rate increased by 8%, sales conversion. I mean, just think about that,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's just it's enormous how much we can actually do if we just take a step back and we actually just look at it and think about how do we as consumers want to go, right? So anyway, to answer your question, I think Google is really powerful for mid funnel, but then we've also done stuff on Bing, depending on who the client is, because CPCs are much lower
Right.
there, right? If you're gonna go and you're gonna do Super Bowl on Google, you're gonna pay crazy CPCs, while on Bing, while the volume is smaller, your CPCs will be lower, and depending on the audience you're targeting, ultimately the campaign can do better, right? So it really depends what you're going after.
Well, Bing is a red-headed stepchild of the search land, but it still converts extremely well. And to your point, it's a lot cheaper overall. I just wish they had the more
Right.
volume to support it. Talk a little bit about, and I heard you speak on that panel as well about qualifying your audiences a little bit further with the quality of the audience versus just the reach. When you try to look at the audiences that you're trying to target, talk a little bit about narrowing in other than just throwing out a broad shotgun linear approach to something.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the the ongoing debate, right, in CPG and in branding, right? where the long standing basically equation is, reach, frequency, penetration, right? So reach as many people as you can, as many times as you can, and it'll lead to penetration, which ultimately leads to sales, right? That's also how basically marketing started, because that was the only way one could basically do it back in the day. And now the question arises, as you said correctly, what happens if you're not going to go after reach, but we're actually going to go after qualified audiences, right? So instead of saying, I'm going to try to hit everybody in the Northeast who's 21 plus, what happens if I say I want to only hit people in New York City who've ordered beer in the last 4 months, basically, right?
Hmm.
And who have delivered from other services, right? So I think that's really the big discussion. The verdict is still out. I think what one has definitely seen, to be fair, is CPMs are higher, obviously,
Sure.
with qualified audiences, right? Because it's just a more narrow audiences. At the same time, there's also a lot of evidence out there that um,
Or lower. Yeah.
CPAs are lower. Exactly. So I think that's really a big issue ultimately, right? What's the trade-off and what's the overall verdict going to be? So in my view, or at least that's what I've been doing in these digital transformation efforts, has really been about, how are we basically going to use these data signals, but also how are we going to measure their impact, right? Everyone can just say it works better, but does it actually work better? What we definitely know is that there's more accountability, right? As I said, with these real-time optimizations, and that's a point for pushback as well, right? If you do data-driven stuff and you have real-time dashboards, there's a lot of accountability within the marketing teams, right? Why is the campaign working? Is it not working? What's the issue? How can we optimize? And so on, right? So these are really larger questions, which, I think there definitely more research has to be there, and I think there are also going to be more distinction between industries. For certain industries it's still going to be a reach, frequency, penetration, and for certain industries which are maybe more niche, it'll be qualified audiences. It's going to be interesting to see how this pans out, right? Because the initial reaction within the marketing industry was like, oh my god, obviously more personalized and more,
More targeted.
more individualized,
Right.
more targeted is going to work better, right? Yeah, it may work better, but ultimately, if you look at your overall spend and your CPMs are through the roof, it's going to be a balance which you need to strike, right? And I think that's something which this trade-off is not sunk in yet, if you know what I mean.
I do, and I worked in an addressable world, so I totally have heard that argument 1,000 times, and you think just from basic logic, if you target better, then you're going to reach it. But there's also so much noise in the market, and that's part of the give up. Sometimes you still don't know as much as you target and as much as what's attributable. Sometimes you still don't know, did they just see somebody walking around with a bottle of Heineken and that's what inspired them to to see it, rather than the 20 ads we directly targeted to that person with. So it's always it's a trade-off, and you just never know. But
Right.
so let's talk a little bit about content. I'm really curious if you're using, as an always on type of brand, are you using content a lot to drive part of your demand gen strategy? And then are you combining a lot of that or any of it with paid search and content efforts together?
Yeah, I mean, it ties into, the conversation we had a little bit about the funnel, right?
Right.
So the strategy which I basically, advocate, and again, it depends on the specifics of the industry and the company, but, one part is the always on, right? Which is basically always the same messaging about your brand or about your value proposition. And then, on top of that, you may have monthly peak events, basically, right? Where you have like, oh, it's Super Bowl, or it's, St. Patrick's Day or Labor Day or whatever, right? And this plan, in my view, and I still struggle to see, why that's such a challenge, to be honest, is, you basically just have your your always on messaging, which goes, January to December, whatever you want to call it. Then you have your key events, and at the beginning of the year, while you're planning for the year, you select the platforms these need to run on, you get your creative ready, you get your copy ready, and you run it. So I really feel like this cross-platform aspect, and while not always everything will be equally relevant to run on every platform, right? So for sports related things, we all know Twitter is a big thing, right? For a more
Hmm.
foodie stuff thing, which could be Labor Day or Memorial Day, you'll maybe put higher media dollars behind Pinterest, right? So I'm not saying everything has to always be on the same platforms, but whenever you are running campaigns across platforms, it is absolutely critical to have the same content, because that's the way the message comes across, right? That's the way you basically drive the consumer. And even we've done a lot of tests, A/B tests on, if you have, let's say, a social ad and your landing page doesn't reflect that same messaging. Like, of course, it's an established fact. It's better to do that, but we've actually run those tests too because we've had to internally prove that,
Sure.
right? Because people are like, who really cares, right? Your bounce rate is significantly higher, right? Because people are like, okay, you just told me it's St. Patrick's Day, and I'm going to your site and I'm seeing an image of, spring. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
that's not why I clicked on your ad. While it may be spring, it's not incorrect, but that's not right. So these simple things are still big challenges, right? Landing pages alignment, all these different aspects. So I mean, to answer your question, I think content is the most critical part. The other thing which I see a lot is, just refurbishing, right? So ads which are basically shot for TV are just like resized to run on social, right? Not mobile first, not social first. Then they'll get resized and get put on Pinterest, right? No. Every platform has their own style, right?
Amen.
If you want to be successful, right? Every platform has their own audience, their own style, their own basically, personality, if you will, right? So you can't just refurbish. So I think that's really a big aspect as well, to understand that and to break it down and commit to it. You'd rather do, like, in my view, you'd rather do three platforms really, really well and dedicatedly than do 10 and just refurbish, because people can tell.
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. Arti, we've come to that time. Are you, in fact, ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I'm a little nervous, I have to be honest, but
Okay.
I'll take the challenge.
You've been warned. Dutch beer or German beer?
Oh, Dutch.
Good, good answer for
Want to
job
get me
security.
fired?
Exactly. AI or IoT?
IoT.
Harvard University or the University of Bern?
Ooh, that's a tough.
Yeah,
I'll
I
go with
looked
my
at your
alma
background.
mater. Yeah, University of Bern. Good old Switzerland.
Beer in a can or beer in a bottle?
Ooh. Can I do draft beer?
Yes, you can. That's an acceptable substitute. Glasses are encouraged. And the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, that's a tough one. Cornbread.
Not bad. Arti, then where do people find out more about you, follow your thoughts and thought leadership, connect with you?
My main platform is really LinkedIn, so it's just LinkedIn slash my full name, without any full stop or anything, and that's really where I update my projects, any speaking engagements and so on. I do have a website which is being developed right now as well. I'm happy to share that as well once it's ready on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Arti, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you so much for having me.
So there was my conversation with Arti Sahgal, a senior digital marketing and transformation leader at the Heineken Company, a tech entrepreneur, and a subject matter expert at digital transformation and demand gen. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from our conversation with her. First, when you think about digital transformation, it's imperative that you don't look at it as a one-time activity. As she said, it's literally an evolution and it's a change in mindset. It's a change in the way of working. It cannot just happen within marketing or any one department. It's across all the touch points with your consumers, as well as how data increases efficiency and how we leverage that data. As technologies evolve, so do your processes, and you must continue to evolve. And it's got to be a commitment driven from the top in your leadership. My experience also tells me that you need advocates in every department to champion that mindset. Whole teams need to embrace it since digital transformation is a cross-functional activity, and you'll need the people that are comfortable with data and who understand the processes that should be in place on how things work and interact. Second, when you look at your tech stack, one of the most important parts of your digital transformation, your strategy on how to use the data, not just get the data, is critical. As she said, clients who are successful are typically not people who buy the technology and then figure out what to do with it, but rather they're the ones who sit there, look at what's the goal, what is the audience, what is the consumer segment, what is the messaging, what is our overall strategy, and then pick basically the technology that supports that. Look, just don't build your strategy around the tools. Use the tools to fulfill a strategy. Third, she added that she views the consumer journey as a funnel and says there's a large disconnect for many brands between funnel stages. I completely agree. You often hear me say that the confused buyer always says no, and I say that often because of the mixed messaging that comes from silo disconnects within marketing campaigns across channels. I like when she said it's really critical to adapt that messaging consistently across channels to where the consumer is actually in their customer journey with us. This is a perfect example of her earlier point regarding the insights and triggers you're using after building up a lot of data. There should be a strategy shift from simply knowing how to collect to knowing how to use that data. The more you connect the data with the technology you're using to give you actionable insights, the better you'll be able to simplify the journey that should be focused on the consumer. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my privilege to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. So you've got the premium podcast with the same premium taste. It's time for a cold one. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.